When I was 14, my life veered onto a path I never anticipated. Mom, always searching for that elusive stability, decided to marry a man with a son already, 17, a few years older than me. It wasn't exactly a match made in heaven, to put it mildly. Almost immediately, the air in the house thickened with unspoken tension. It began subtly, the kind of irritations that fester when you force unrelated people to live as one family. Dishes piling in the sink, his left there seemingly expecting a magical cleaning fairy, while I was the one lectured about kitchen tidiness. My shampoo bottles mysteriously emptying at an alarming rate, only to see my stepbrother sporting what looked suspiciously like the same volumizing formula. But it wasn't just the petty stepbrother squabbles that wore me down. It was how stepdad handled, or rather, didn't handle, things. He had this innate assumption that I was the cause of every single problem. Something out of place? Automatically, it was my fault. And Mom, she was so invested in making this cobbled-together family work, she turned a blind eye. Excuses were her specialty, always smoothing things over, implying my stepbrother could do no wrong in her eyes. About a year into this strange new arrangement, Mom and stepdad announced they were expecting. That's when the foundation under my feet really began to crumble. Suddenly, everything revolved around the new baby. The house needed preparing, which translated to my room being conveniently chosen as the nursery. I was relegated to the tiny guest room, barely big enough to hold my bed, let alone my life. It felt like a demotion, a blatant signal of my position in this newly formed family hierarchy. As my half-brother grew, he quickly became the center of their world, the undeniable golden child. My stepbrother, already accustomed to being spoiled, only amplified his entitled behavior, knowing he had free rein. He dropped out of college and moved back home, bringing a chaotic whirlwind with him, late-night parties, questionable friends filtering in and out at all hours. Complaints were met with resigned shrugs from stepdad and sad looks from Mom, as if helplessness was their only option. I started spending every spare moment away from that house. Friends' houses, the library, anywhere I could recapture some semblance of normalcy. School became my refuge. Clubs, extra classes, tutoring sessions, anything to delay the inevitable return home. It wasn't just teenage rebellion, it was a desperate attempt at self-preservation. The atmosphere at home was suffocating, a constant tiptoeing around eggshells, bracing myself for the next eruption. It was as though they forgot that I was even there. One night, everything shifted drastically. I overheard Mom speaking with my stepfather, her voice low and conspiratorial. They were discussing their wills. I came home late that evening, later than planned because of that school project. The house was eerily silent, a silence that felt wrong. On the fridge, I found a note, a casual announcement that they'd all gone out for dinner, a family dinner I hadn't been invited to. The words themselves were innocuous enough, but the message punched me in the gut. It felt like I only existed in their minds when there was someone to blame. My 18th birthday wasn't even cold before things came to a head. I'd been diligently saving every penny from my part-time job, a job I'd fought for despite stepdad's constant grumbling about how it would supposedly affect my studies. The truth was, he just didn't want me out from under his thumb. One afternoon, I walked in to find my room ransacked. My stepbrother had thrown a party while they were out, and my room had apparently become collateral damage. Beer soaked into my project papers, a broken lamp lying on the floor, and the sickening feeling that my personal space had been violated. The next morning, I confronted them all at breakfast. Stepdad's response was a dismissive shrug and a cold comment about how I should have been more careful with my belongings. Mom just sighed, offering some platitude about family sticking together and needing to let things go. But I was so tired of letting things go. Throughout those teenage years, it felt like every little thing I did was scrutinized under a harsh spotlight, not in a supportive, let's help you grow kind of way, but in a let's catch you doing something wrong kind of way. My stepbrother, who had perfected the art of being a couch potato, always seemed to escape any blame. My little half-brother was young, I knew that, but the constant doting made it painfully clear who the favorites were. I remember this one science project, something I was genuinely excited about. I needed quiet, a dedicated space, both precious commodities at home. I tried setting up a makeshift workspace in the corner of the living room, but it was like trying to work in Grand Central Station. My stepbrother would blast his music, the little one would be running around screaming, and then stepdad would inevitably find some reason to tell me to move my things. "You're taking up too much space," he'd say, or "your project is making a mess." It was endlessly frustrating. I felt like I was trying to build a sandcastle in the middle of a hurricane. Finally, one day, I reached my breaking point. I packed up my project and stormed over to a friend's house. Her parents were always so welcoming, and they immediately offered me their quiet dining room to spread out my work. It was the first time in ages that I felt like I could actually think. It was then that the sheer abnormality of my home life really hit me. My friend noticed the immediate relief I felt just being able to work in peace. "You're always welcome here," she said one day, seeing the tension melt away from me the moment I stepped inside her house. It was a small kindness, but it meant the world to me. More importantly, it made me realize that this wasn't normal. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. Home wasn't a haven, but a place I constantly sought escape from. My part-time job became a refuge, so I started grabbing extra shifts whenever possible. If I wasn't in class or at a friend's, I was working. It wasn't just for the money. Each hour away from the house felt like a weight lifted from my chest, a little easier to breathe. My stepfather, predictably, wasn't happy. He'd go on and on about how the job was a distraction from my studies, but I knew it was more about me being less available for his criticisms. As my savings grew, the idea of moving out solidified into a plan. I knew it wouldn't be a smooth process. My mom and stepfather would not take it well, I was sure of it. But the more I considered it, the clearer it became. It was the only way I could reclaim some control over my life. The day I finally told them arrived, a knot forming in my stomach. I had found a small, affordable apartment relatively close to campus. I gathered them in the living room, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "I'm moving out," I stated, trying to keep my voice from trembling. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My stepfather was the first to break it. "You think you're prepared to live alone at your age?" he scoffed, dripping with condescension. My mother simply stared, her expression unreadable, her eyes darting between us. "I am," I replied, hoping I sounded more self-assured than I felt. "I need my own space. I've saved enough to cover expenses." The argument that followed was intense, a barrage of accusations. I was ungrateful, running from my responsibilities at home. My stepfather even tried to manipulate me by bringing up my little brother. "He looks up to you, he said, as if that was reason enough to remain in a situation that was suffocating me. I stood my ground, though. This wasn't just about wanting my own place. It was about needing it for my own sanity, for my mental well-being. The next few days were a whirlwind of packing. Each item I placed in a box felt like another brick in the wall I was building between myself and that house, protecting myself. On moving day, my mother came into my room. I braced myself for another confrontation, but instead, she started helping me pack. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was all superficial small talk. "Do you need more boxes? Or I have some extra kitchen things you can take." It was as if staying on neutral topics could keep us from acknowledging the tension simmering in the room. Finally, after unloading the last box, I closed the door to my new apartment. I was immediately hit by a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief, yes, but also a pang of sadness, a surge of excitement, and a heavy dose of fear. I was officially on my own now, truly on my own. It was terrifying, but also undeniably liberating. The terror was real, a cold fist clenching my stomach, but so was this unexpected sense of liberation. Those first few nights in my own place were the hardest, undeniably. The silence of the apartment was almost deafening, a stark contrast to the chaotic hum of the family home. I even missed the sound of my stepdad's booming laugh, the incessant chatter during dinner, well, a little bit. But as the days bled into weeks, I began to truly cherish the quiet. I could come and go as I pleased, eat peanut butter straight from the jar at 3 a.m. if I wanted to, sleep in until noon without someone banging on the door. It was as if I were finally meeting a part of myself that I had kept carefully hidden, muted by years of trying to fit in. Life on my own quickly settled into a comfortable rhythm, and honestly, it was the most at peace I'd felt in years. My relationship with my mom and stepdad had always been complicated. Not terrible, but not exactly warm and fuzzy. But distance definitely helped. I was busy, immersed in work and college, focusing on my own life, my own goals. Then, seemingly out of the blue, my mom called. Her voice was subdued, uncharacteristically somber. "Your stepdad's been thinking about his will," she said, her tone far too casual for the weight of the subject. "He wants to get everything in order." "Okay," I replied, a knot of unease tightening in my chest. There was something unspoken hanging in the air. This wasn't just a friendly keeping you in the loop call. She hesitated, a beat too long, and then dropped the bomb. "He's decided to include your stepbrother and your half-brother in the will, but not you. He feels it makes more sense since they're his biological children." The sting was immediate and sharp. It wasn't like I was expecting a windfall, but to hear it stated so plainly, so matter-of-factly, felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't about the money, it was the clear, unambiguous message: I was an outsider. After all these years of trying, hoping, I was still just an add-on, not a real part of their family. "I see," I managed to say, keeping my voice carefully neutral, betraying nothing. "Thanks for letting me know." She must have sensed my hurt because she rushed to fill the silence. "It's just legal stuff, you know. It doesn't change how we feel about you." "Right," I said, the word feeling hollow and meaningless. I didn't believe her, not for a second. The conversation limped along to other, safer topics, but the damage was done. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, that familiar ache of not belonging settling deep in my bones. The following weeks were difficult. I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, each time the sting feeling fresh. Part of me burned with the urge to confront my stepdad, to demand an explanation, to tell him, just once, how much his words had hurt. But another part of me, a quieter, more pragmatic part, just wondered why I even cared. Hadn't I known, deep down, that I would always be on the periphery? I hadn't felt like a real part of their family for years. Perhaps this was just the confirmation I'd been subconsciously expecting all along. Why was this different from all the other times I'd felt that sting of being on the periphery? I made the choice to pull back even further, to see them even less. I recognize now it was self-preservation, a shield against more pain inflicted by people who, at crucial moments, had made it abundantly clear I wasn't truly family to them. Then came a moment of clarity, a quiet realization rather than a dramatic confrontation. I was hunched over a textbook at a coffee shop, trying to wrestle my thoughts into a coherent term paper when I overheard a group at the next table. They were laughing, reminiscing about family stories, the good, the bad, the mundane. Just normal family stuff. And it struck me like a blow. I didn't have that. I hadn't had it for a very long time, perhaps never. That realization ignited something within me. Why was I wasting my energy and emotions on being upset about being excluded from a will when I had already been excluded from the family dynamic in all the ways that truly mattered? It wasn't about the money, of course. It was about craving the feeling of being valued, being loved, by the people who were supposed to be my family. From that moment onward, I deliberately shifted my focus to the relationships in my life that did nurture and validate me. My friends who had, in essence, become my chosen family. My professors who offered guidance and support. My colleagues who treated me with respect and valued my contributions. I poured my energy into those connections, investing in those bonds. Gradually, the sting of my stepdad's will and the persistent feeling of exclusion from the family began to lose their power over me. It wasn't an instant transformation. There were still moments when resentment would creep in, especially during family gatherings when I'd witness my stepbrother and half-brother being showered with attention. But I was learning to accept that some things were beyond my control. And where I did have control, I was actively building my own support system, my own definition of family and belonging. The real challenge came after my stepdad's health scare subsided and their lives returned to their usual routines. I received an invitation to a family dinner, a celebration of sorts of his recovery. I accepted, but more out of a sense of obligation than genuine desire. The dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as I had anticipated. My stepdad recounted the details of his recovery, everyone fawned over my half-brother's latest academic achievements, and my stepbrother boasted about his new job. I mostly sat in silence, acutely aware that I was the outlier. But this time, the sting wasn't as sharp. I had arrived at a place of acceptance regarding my role, or lack thereof, in this family. I was the outsider, and that was okay. Because outside those walls, I had people who genuinely cared about me, not for what I could potentially inherit or contribute to the family name. After dinner, I made my excuses and left early, mumbling something about an early morning. As I drove home, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I was okay. Really, truly okay. For the first time in what felt like forever, I'd finally taken stock of my life, weathered the emotional storm that followed, and emerged feeling stronger, more sure of myself. If there's one constant I've learned, it's that life enjoys tossing curveballs when you least expect them. I'd settled into my own rhythm, accepting the somewhat distant, if not strained, relationship I had with my family. Then, one ordinary afternoon, a phone call shattered that fragile peace. It was a lawyer. Someone I'd never heard of. His voice was formal, almost apologetic as he introduced himself. He asked if I had a few moments to discuss the estate of my great-aunt, my dad's mother's sister. Honestly, she was barely a memory. One of those relatives who only existed in family stories. She'd never had children of her own, and I vaguely remembered her being mentioned as someone who helped my dad when he was younger. "I'm calling to inform you that your great-aunt recently passed away," the lawyer continued, his voice softening slightly, "and she left her entire estate to you." Shock doesn't even begin to cover it. A jumble of emotions swirled inside me, sadness at her passing, bewilderment about why me, and a daunting sense of responsibility for whatever came next. He explained that my great-aunt had been quite successful, a savvy investor throughout her life. She'd left behind a considerable estate, including a trust fund, now mine, totaling around $3 million. Just like that, my entire financial landscape shifted overnight. After the call, I sat there, phone still clutched in my hand, trying to make sense of it all. Why me? We weren't close. I'd visited her a handful of times, but those visits felt more like dutiful check-ins on an elderly relative than genuine bonding. She must have seen something, some potential, maybe a flicker of her own independent spirit, or perhaps it was her way of extending a hand to family one last time. The next few days became a blur of meetings with the lawyer, signing countless documents and trying to understand exactly what I'd inherited. It wasn't just money. There were properties, stocks, and a handful of personal items that held sentimental value. Among them was a letter, her handwriting elegant and familiar even after all these years, explaining her decision. She admired my fierce independence and my determination, traits that she said mirrored her own at my age. Armed with this unexpected wealth, I made some immediate decisions. I bought a house, something I never thought would be within reach for me so soon. It was modest, not extravagant, but it was mine. It felt like the first step into a brand new chapter. I also invested in a rental property, trying to plan for long-term financial security. The remaining money I placed into savings and investments, carefully consulting with a financial advisor to ensure I was making sound choices. But I knew, even then, that with great wealth comes great responsibility, and, as I was soon to discover, possibly great drama. I hadn't told anyone in my family about the inheritance, wanting to avoid, well, something. I wasn't sure what, but I knew keeping it quiet was the right thing to do. I soon learned that secrets have a way of surfacing, and this one was no exception. It all began when my cousin, somehow, through whispered connections in the legal world, sniffed out the inheritance. One minute I was blissfully unaware, the next my mother knew. And once she knew, the news spread like wildfire through the family. The phone started ringing incessantly, not just her, but my stepfather, my stepbrother, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Suddenly, everyone had a sob story about why they deserved a cut. Times are tough, they'd whine or remember how his health has been, referring to my stepfather. It felt like I'd become nothing more than an ATM to them. I was bombarded with requests, disguised as friendly loans, subtle gift suggestions, and outright demands for a handout. It was like watching vultures circling overhead, each waiting for the opportune moment to swoop down and grab their share. The pressure was suffocating. For a split second, I wavered, wondering if I was being selfish for clinging to what was rightfully mine. But then the memories flooded back. Years of feeling like the odd one out in my own family. Years of scraping by, pinching pennies, working multiple jobs to get myself through college, without a single offer of help from them. This was my chance to finally secure my future. I refused to let guilt or manipulative tactics sway me. When my mother finally confronted me, directly questioning why I hadn't shared the news, I'd reached my breaking point. I explained, as calmly as I could manage, that the chasm between us wasn't just geographical, it was deeply emotional. Her actions, coupled with those of my stepfather and stepbrother, had made my place in their lives painfully clear. This inheritance was an opportunity for me to do things my way, on my own terms, without needing to rely on anyone else. It's my life, I told her, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands, and I need to live it as I see fit. I'm sorry if that hurts you, but I have to prioritize what's best for me now. The aftermath of that conversation was precisely what I'd expected. Accusations of being ungrateful and selfish were hurled at me like stones, but I stood my ground, refusing to flinch. Gradually, the phone calls became less frequent. The desperate pleas for money petered out as they realized I wouldn't budge. It was a harsh but valuable lesson in discovering who my real family was. Not defined by blood or legal ties, but by those who supported me unconditionally, without expecting anything in return. Those were the relationships I cherished and continued to cultivate. As for the inheritance, it remains a bittersweet reminder of my great-aunt, a woman I wish I had known better. Her final gift was not just the financial security she provided, but the clarity and conviction to stand up for myself, regardless of the emotional cost. It was supposed to be a blessing, a stroke of luck from a distant relative who believed I could put it to good use. But the moment the news got out, it felt less like a gift and more like I'd painted a giant target on my back. And after I made it clear to my mother, stepfather, stepbrother, and various other long-lost relatives I wasn't going to be writing any checks, everything changed fast. What had started as thinly veiled suggestions soon became pleas and quickly escalated into angry demands. The messages started trickling in, each one a variation on a theme. Heard about Aunt So-and-so, they'd begin, expressing obligatory condolences. So sorry for your loss, but could you maybe help me out with some money? Things are really tight. It felt rehearsed, each plea echoing the last, only the names changing. I remember thinking, is this all I am to them? One phone call stands out, the one from my stepfather. He had never been a particularly warm person, but this was different. It felt calculated, almost predatory. He started, his voice coated in a thin layer of manufactured sincerity. We've always considered you part of the family. It's only right you think of your brothers during this difficult time. The phrase guilt trip glaze comes to mind now. I surprised myself with my response, the sharpness of it. My brothers haven't considered me family unless they needed something. I snapped back before I could stop myself. That's a harsh way to put it, he retorted, but I could hear the surprise in his voice. I had always played the part of the compliant stepchild, the one who didn't make waves. The conversation quickly spiraled downwards from there, dissolving into accusations and recriminations. He accused me of being selfish, and I reminded him of all the times I'd felt excluded, unimportant, like an outsider in his family. By the time we hung up, both of us were too angry to listen to reason. The unspoken understanding hung heavy in the air. Things would never be the same between us. Then my mother got involved, trying to mediate, but it was clear whose side she was on. She showed up unannounced at my new house, a strained smile plastered on her face. "It's what families do," she insisted, referring to the inheritance. Families support each other. Exhaustion washed over me. When have you ever supported me like this, emotionally or financially? I challenged her, the words raw and laced with years of unspoken resentment. She fell silent, unable to offer a response. Our relationship had been superficial, at best, for years. This money had only stripped away the pretense, exposing the underlying issues we had both carefully avoided. After that visit, the calls and messages gradually decreased, then stopped altogether. I think they finally accepted that I wasn't going to give in. It was a relief, yes, but also a deep disappointment. It hurt to realize that my value to them was so closely tied to what I could provide financially. In the aftermath of the family fallout, I made a conscious decision to invest more energy into my relationships with friends and colleagues, people who valued me for who I was, not for my bank account. I also began volunteering at a local shelter, something I had always wanted to do, but never seemed to have the time or resources for before. Giving back on my own terms proved to be unexpectedly healing. It helped me connect with others, build new friendships, and fill the void left by my family's conditional love. I even started seeing a therapist, which was probably long overdue. She helped me unpack the years of emotional baggage, the feelings of betrayal and abandonment that had resurfaced during this whole ordeal. It was difficult, dredging up those old wounds, but it was necessary. I learned to set boundaries, to recognize the signs of manipulative behavior, and, most importantly, to prioritize my own needs and well-being. One day, the weight of their constant requests finally broke me. I decided to write letters to each family member who had been relentlessly pressuring me for money. In each, I poured out my feelings, carefully explaining the decisions I had made regarding my own finances and how their demands and actions had affected me deeply. The letters were really for my own peace of mind, a way to release the pent-up frustration. Honestly, I didn't expect any replies. So, when my half-brother, the youngest at only 14, responded, I was shocked. His letter was, as you might imagine, a bit clumsy, but undeniably sincere. "I'm sorry for asking for money. I miss you," he wrote. Just those few simple words. It was a small gesture, maybe, but it felt significant. We started texting just little things about his school, his video game obsessions. It wasn't much, but it was something. A potential connection, a fragile thread that offered a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild at least one relationship within my family. Update 1 *. Okay, everyone, I wanted to give you an update on what's been happening since my last post. I wish I could tell you things had improved over the last few weeks, but honestly, they've spiraled from bad to unbelievably worse. I honestly don't know where I'd be without all of your support and advice. You've been a lifeline during this absolutely crazy time. So, after the initial explosion with my family, my mom contacted me in August wanting to talk. Knowing everything that had happened, I had a pretty strong feeling this wasn't going to be a friendly catch-up over coffee. To try and keep things relatively neutral, I suggested we meet in a public place. I thought maybe that would minimize the drama, or at least prevent things from getting completely out of control. The meetup was awkward from the very start. My mom launched right into a litany of financial woes. She talked about how much they were struggling, how my half-brother's private school tuition had become an unbearable burden since my stepdad had gotten sick and his work hours had been cut drastically. Then, she seamlessly transitioned into how desperately they wanted to renovate the house and how she needed a vacation to escape the mental toll of everything that was going on. And through all of this, she didn't ask me one single question about my life, about how I was doing, how I was coping. It was like I was just a silent audience member, forced to listen to her laundry list of problems. I felt increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation went on, like I was simply a spectator to her suffering, rather than her daughter. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I just snapped and asked her to get to the point. Without a moment's hesitation, she dropped the bomb. She expected me to write her a check for $1 million. Yes, you read that right. A cool million. She claimed that technically the money should all be hers anyway, since it was tied to her late husband's inheritance, my grandaunt's will, I believe, but she was being generous by only asking for a third. My jaw dropped further with each outrageous demand. I couldn't believe my ears. I practically threw my money on the table, desperate to escape. Since then, it's been a nightmare. Mom's been on a rampage, telling anyone who'll listen that I stole what was rightfully hers. It's mortifying. Then came the novel-length text from my stepdad, lecturing me about family and how my decisions should consider everyone else. The hypocrisy was astounding. I reminded him, perhaps too sharply, that I wasn't included in his will because I wasn't family enough then. That shut him up for a few hours at least. The whole situation has spiraled completely out of control. They're both running a smear campaign, bad-mouthing me to anyone who'll listen. Honestly, I'm starting to feel genuinely unsafe. It's as if they're actively trying to alienate me, painting me as the villain in a drama they themselves have created. I'm trying so hard to stay calm, to think rationally, but it's incredibly difficult when the people who should be my biggest supporters are deliberately trying to make my life miserable. I'll let you know if anything changes, but right now, it's just a massive, tangled mess. I'm so grateful for all the support and advice. Knowing there are people who understand makes a huge difference. Update 2 *, okay? Buckle up, because things have gotten even crazier. The past few weeks have been an absolute whirlwind, and I'm barely managing to keep my head above water. I can't express how much I appreciate all the support and advice you've all given me. It's been invaluable in navigating this chaos, so thank you from the bottom of my heart. So, here's the latest. A couple of weeks ago, I received this incredibly official-looking letter out of the blue. It was from a lawyer I'd never heard of, claiming that Mom is suing me for a significant portion of my inheritance. Yes, you read that right. My own mother is suing me. My initial reaction was sheer, unadulterated panic. Who wouldn't freak out? My mind was racing, picturing endless legal battles and mounting costs. But just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more dramatic, my stepdad sends me this truly ominous text. He basically said I would regret not sharing my money and that they were going to take me for everything I'm worth. The audacity was just breathtaking. I was rattled, but I wasn't going to give up. I immediately sent everything to my attorney, bracing myself for a long, drawn-out ordeal. But guess what? My attorney literally burst out laughing when he read the letter. Not just a polite chuckle, but a full-blown "are you kidding me?" kind of laugh. He tossed the letter in the trash and told me not to waste a single second worrying about it. Apparently, my great-aunt's will is ironclad, practically impenetrable. It was almost comical, like something out of a bad movie, except this is my life. There's absolutely no way my mother can legally touch a dime of what I inherited. The will is crystal clear, she's not a descendant, and it explicitly names the beneficiaries. But my lawyer, being the incredibly thorough professional he is, didn't stop at the obvious. He did some digging into the supposed lawyer who sent that ridiculous letter. It turns out the office address listed is a dilapidated building, the kind that looks like it hasn't seen a tenant in decades. And the phone number? Disconnected. No longer in service. It hit me. My parents were desperate. They'd apparently decided to hire some bottom-of-the-barrel, likely fraudulent lawyer in a last-ditch, pathetic attempt to scare me into handing over some of my inheritance. It was simultaneously a huge relief and a sobering reality check to realize they thought they could bully me with such a transparent, weak threat. The audacity, knowing it was just a bluff, made me feel like a huge weight had been lifted. I mean, I was bracing myself for a drawn-out legal battle, but now I just feel disappointed and almost sorry for them. That they would resort to such a thing. With that particular brand of family craziness somewhat diffused, I decided I desperately needed a break. I've been so tense, losing sleep, just generally on edge ever since this whole thing started. I vented to my best friends, and we all agreed a getaway was essential. So, I'm taking some time off work next week to travel with them. Nothing extravagant, just a road trip to some of those places we've always joked about visiting but never actually made the time for. I think a change of scenery, some fresh air, and a whole lot of laughter are exactly what I need to clear my head and recharge my batteries. It's a strange feeling, though, reflecting on how things have played out. I genuinely admired my mother and stepfather for so long. To see them behave this way now, it's just incredibly disappointing. It's taught me a painful lesson. Sometimes you have to create space between yourself and the people who are supposed to support you when they start actively trying to bring you down. It's far from easy, and it hurts more than I want to admit, but it's necessary for my own well-being. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to this trip. A little adventure, lots of good laughs, and meaningful time with my friends. It's precisely what I need to escape the family drama, even if just for a little while. I'll keep everyone updated on how it goes and if any new fires erupt back home. But for now, I'm choosing to focus on the positive, on moving forward, and refusing to let this whole mess continue to define me or drag me down.